Um, yeah, so welcome everyone. This is our December Wisdom Community Forum, the last forum of 2023. We've been doing these now for 2 years, every month, and on various topics around women's health, breast screening, really with an opportunity to try and bring some of these topics to you, to our community and our partners, and really be able to have some good discussions around what information is out there and what we're hoping to learn in the wisdom study and in research in general. So if you haven't already, please do introduce yourself in the chat and note what brought you to the forum today. We always love to see how people heard about the forum and where you come from, where you are in the country, and or if you represent different organizations or if you're a wisdom study participant. So just as a quick intro, I'm Allison Fiscalini. I'm the director of the Wisdom Study based at UC San Francisco. I've been working on the Wisdom Study for the last 10 plus years since it was first conceptualized, and have been here ever since. So I'm happy to be here and happy to see so many people here today too. All right. So as we get going here, just a reminder for the format. We do really want to hear from you. We want to hear your questions. You can send those in the chat. You can raise your hand. We'll have time for Q&A sort of sprinkled throughout, but please don't hesitate to raise your hand or submit a question in the chat. We do want to try and make this interactive and engaging. If you're not speaking, please do mute yourself. We are recording it, so it will be posted on our YouTube channel so that we can give it as a resource for people who weren't able to join today. And then at the end, we'll have a short survey to give some feedback on how the session went, as well as any future topics you'd like to see. Our mission here, again, as I said, is really to come together and to move together toward equity and better outcomes in breast cancer for everyone, and really trying to dig in and look at some of the various components of the whole, all of the different factors and contributions to why someone might develop breast cancer, and just how to maintain overall health. We've had a whole host of other topics over the last 2 years. You can see many of them listed here. This month, that one's a little outdated. That was last month, was Fiber for Your Health. But what we'll discuss this month is actually somewhat related, but more around diet, alcohol, and risk of breast cancer as well. So we have two guest speakers today. Laura Esterman should also be joining here momentarily. She should be on shortly. She's the overall director and leader of the Wisdom Study and overall principal investigator based at UCSF. We have Sharon Green, who is a Wisdom participant and also a behavioral scientist who's particularly interested in this topic, as well as Dr. Walter Willett, who's a professor of epidemiology and nutrition at Harvard and one of the foremost experts in this area. He's led the Nurses Health Study 2, as well as many, many, many other studies and clinical care around aging and health and overall well-being. So welcome to you both, and thanks so much for being here. Again, please don't hesitate to ask questions, and we're looking forward to.
Hi, everyone.
Oh, there's Laura.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry, I had to relaunch Chrome apparently to get in.
Okay. Well, we're just about to have Sharon start her slides and her introduction, and then we'll have Dr. Willett go.
Hi, everybody. I am relying on Sarah. Thank you, Sarah, for helping me drive this. I'm happy to see everybody, and I'm here in, I think, a somewhat unique position. On this first slide, I'm sharing with you the email that I got in January of this year, reminding me that as a member of the participant in the Wisdom Study and a member of the annual group, that I needed to schedule my annual mammogram and report my results, which I think I finally got around to scheduling in March, as in I made the appointment in March and went in at the beginning of June for my mammogram. Sarah, if you want to move to the next slide. I am here as a case in point, and I'd like to say hello to those of you who are participating as members of the Wisdom Study in today's forum. I'm 67 years old. I'm postmenopausal. I had my one and only child when I was 39. I have no personal history of cancer, and as far as I knew, I had no immediate family history of cancer, no genetic markers, and to tell me that I needed to be concerned. I had a healthy diet, regular exercise, and in June of this year, breast cancer was not on my radar. And what got me in for my mammogram was honestly wanting to make sure that I was fulfilling my wisdom study obligation to get in for that annual exam. I'd gotten word in the last couple of years from my insurance company that every 2 years was probably just fine for me. And I insisted on every year because I was a wisdom study participant who'd been assigned to the annual exam. So I was caught off guard and a bit surprised when I started getting lots of communications from the Caroline Reed Breast Center in Oakland saying that they wanted me back in as soon as possible. Sarah, if you'd like to move forward. I learned at that point that I had invasive lobular carcinoma, which I knew nothing about. Because I'm trained as a scientist, I immediately started digging into to try to learn more. And I learned that my diagnosis was as early as it could be, thanks to my participation in the Wisdom Study, because invasive lobular carcinoma is hard to detect in self-exams and even through the screenings. My first report from the breast center was that there was an architectural distortion, which I was not sure what that meant. And so I learned through my research that invasive lobular carcinoma develops and grows differently than invasive ductal carcinoma, which develops in lumps, which is what I had been looking for and not finding on my own. And the invasive lobular carcinoma grows in kind of sheets, and so is hard to detect. So I had stage 2 estrogen positive invasive lobular carcinoma. And very shortly after I got my diagnosis, I went into my wisdom study communication and I found the phone number and called and had the good fortune of getting to talk to Natalie Kim, who is joining us on today's forum. And Natalie asked me a lot of questions and encouraged me to stay in touch because I had a lot of questions and a number of things that I wanted to know about what was happening with the wisdom study. So Sarah, if you want to move forward. I had the very good fortune of working with Dr. Rita Mukhtar, UCSF breast oncologist and surgeon scientist, who is leading an invasive lobular carcinoma clinical and translational research trial, has been studying ILC for a number of years. And I learned from her that invasive lobular carcinoma is the second most common type of breast cancer. I didn't realize at the time that there were different kinds of breast cancer. ILC accounts for plus or minus about 10% of cases. And I have learned that ILC presents some unique treatment challenges. It grows differently, it's more difficult to detect, and it results in later stage diagnoses. And so I have been learning as much as I can about what I need to know, what I need to be doing in order to be safe and attempting to beat the odds as I move ahead. Sarah, if you'd like to click forward. When I met with Dr. Mukhtar the first time, and it looks like my slides are a little off here, but one of the first things she asked me was, do you drink alcohol? And I said, well, yes. And she said, I advise that you stop or that you cut way back. And we talked in that first meeting about the relationship that is emerging between alcohol consumption and breast cancer, and that this relationship is particularly strong for invasive lobular carcinoma. We talked about the fact that I fit very nicely into that cohort of women in the Marin breast cancer cluster that was reported a number of years ago. Older white women who come to childbirth late and are college graduates and have a particular penchant for a good glass of Chardonnay on a regular basis. I started drinking later in life. It wasn't something that I did more than once in a while in social gatherings when I was younger. It wasn't until I was an academic administrator that I started coming home and having a glass of wine or two as part of a coping mechanism, and it became a habit. So that by the time I was diagnosed with invasive lobular carcinoma, I realized that this might be affecting my health, and it was kind of a shock when I started looking more closely at the research having to do with this association. Next slide, Sarah. So I started looking into what I might be able to do to beat the odds. And I have learned that invasive lobular carcinoma can metastasize to unusual places, and that this frequently happens many years after the primary diagnosis. So I have successfully moved through surgery with clean margins, no lymph node involvement. I'm going to be starting radiation at the beginning of January, but I have learned that my lifestyle choices are going to impact what I am going to be dealing with in the future. So I started asking what lifestyle choices make a difference, and how can I reduce the risk of recurrence and the metastases that are liable to show up in my gut, for example. I've started asking a lot of questions about whether I need to stop all alcohol consumption, and I've received some mixed responses from my healthcare team. So I have to assume there's not one definitive answer out there. Do I need to stop having coffee in the morning and adding milk and sugar to the coffee in the morning? What can I eat? What should I eat? What shouldn't I eat? So I've been doing a lot of research and asking a lot of questions of my healthcare team, and I think it's why I'm here today, because I have been asking all these questions. Sarah, if you want to move to the next slide. I have another set of concerns that I shared with Natalie when I first called the wisdom study to report my change in status. As I started reading about the relationship between alcohol consumption and the increased risk of breast cancer, I also started coming across recent reports about younger women getting breast cancer early. And there was an article in the Washington Post that came out in August, just a week after I first spoke with Natalie about my concerns. I have 4 amazing, strong, dynamic nieces who are out in the world doing amazing things that range in age from 28 to 34, and they all drink alcohol. I don't believe that any of them would count themselves as alcoholics, but they are representative, in my experience, of their age, their cohort, and that is that alcohol consumption is very high. And the recent research that's come out indicates that that American women under 50 are experiencing a rise in invasive breast cancer diagnoses. Between 2010 and 2019, diagnoses among young people between the ages of 30 and 39 increased by 19.4%, and for young women between 20 and 29 by 5.3%. Breast cancer now accounts for the highest number of cancers diagnosed among younger people, and the rate of late-stage breast cancer diagnosis among young people is on the rise. While genetics is a known risk factor, it turns out the research shows that most of these younger women who develop breast cancer don't have a genetic risk. So what's being reported now is that having dense breasts, delaying childbirth till later, delaying pregnancy till later, are risk factors. But what's getting the most attention and what I have been able to find is lifestyle issues, including diet, weight, and alcohol consumption, all contributing to breast cancer risk. So last slide, Sarah. So I started asking, how can I help? Is there anything that I can do to be involved? And so I have been doing everything I can to learn what I can about breast cancer and the associations between these lifestyle factors and breast cancer. Taking every opportunity I can to share my experience. It's why I'm here today. And I talk with anybody who asks me about what my experience is to try to raise awareness. I have started talking to colleagues in my community of behavioral change experts about what is being done or could be done to both raise awareness and collaborate around creating behavioral change among young women and women in my cohort, postmenopausal women, who may not be aware of and paying attention to how these lifestyle choices might be affecting their health.
So Sharon, I want to just thank you for sharing your story and for your intense interest in this topic.
Yeah.
And that was one of the reasons why we, invited Walter Willett to talk about this, because he's one of the foremost experts on diet,
Right.
lifestyle, and alcohol. And I think that your point about young women drinking more
Right.
in college and the binge drinking and so on,
Yes.
I think is a really important point, and something that we have not really focused on very much at all. And I think we should come back to that. Walter, I think at the end of your talk, I think we should really be thinking about the kinds of things that we can do. And I think it is also important to know that it's not like if you drink alcohol, you'll get breast cancer, and if you don't, you won't. It's not that way. You know, it's like
Right.
if you are a good driver, you're much less likely to get in an accident and more like that, and what we'll learn about. And you can't control everything, but there are things that all of us can do. And of course, it's harder to get kids that are younger to think that anything will ever go wrong in the future. So,
Yes.
but breast cancer is a common enough disease that most people know someone with breast cancer. So, Walter, I know that, you know, I think it's particularly apt for you to talk right around the holidays when I think that everyone feels pressure to drink or enjoys drinking. And is this something that everybody should, and there's all this good food around. So it's like, what do we really know? And what is it that people should be taking away here?
Okay, well, thank you for that introduction. Actually, I have a message that I can't share my screen. There it goes. Okay, I can share now. Thank you. Great. Well, thank you, Dr. Green, for sharing your experience with breast cancer, because it does reflect a huge issue. And of course, I think we all know, and the reason everyone is here is that breast cancer is extremely common, and especially because it hits women who are young, middle-aged, in the middle of their careers while they're raising family, and it's triply, of course, consequential in that context. So I'll describe very briefly in a few minutes here some of the findings we've had in the Nurses' Health Study and how we conduct the Nurses' Health Study. But this would take hours to describe everything that we've learned over the past 40-some years. Very briefly, the Nurses' Health Study started back in 1976. And at that time, the focus was primarily on oral contraceptives. And let's see, maybe I can make my screen here a little bit bigger. Okay.
Let's push the little start show button at the bottom.
Right. Yeah, down here.
It's on the bottom right.
Yeah, somehow there we go. Great. Yeah, I think it's on full screen now.
Yeah.
The study started back in 1976 because there had been just the beginning of the use of oral contraceptives on a widespread basis. And because they're potent hormonal preparations, there was a real concern that this might be a time bomb ticking for breast cancer. And so the study was very focused on oral contraceptive use in breast cancer at that time. And that continues to be a story. I won't really go down that road unless somebody wants to talk about it. But I started working on the Nurses' Health Study in 1976 when I was, after my medical education and internal medicine training, I did a doctoral degree in epidemiology and was working on smoking and heart disease in the Nurses' Health Study. And because I've been interested in nutrition for many years, most of my life actually, I realized this could be an incredible platform in which we could learn about diet and heart and breast cancer in particular, but diet in relation to other outcomes more broadly. So the main barrier between knowing nothing much about diet and cancer and actually having studies was not having a good way to measure diet. Many people thought it might be important, but how do you measure diet in 100,000 people? And so I worked developing and pilot testing some standardized dietary questionnaires and found that they were working pretty well. And in 1980, we did start collecting data on diet from the Nurses' Health Study. And I might mention that we actually, Frank Spicer, who founded the Nurses' Health Study, specifically enrolled nurses because it was thought that the data could be good. Nurses can report medical information accurately, and also that they'd be motivated and understand the need for a long-term follow-up study. Although I think no one really imagined that we'd still be following the participants after more than 45 years. And what we've learned is really the result, and only possible because of the incredible commitment of the participants in the study. We have still about 90% follow-up as of 2022, which has been really incredible. So this is really the contribution of the many participants that we've had. So using standardized dietary questionnaires that included alcohol questions, we began collecting data in 1980. And along with diet, we have data on smoking and weight and height, medical history, medication use. Along the way, we've collected blood for DNA and measuring hormones and plasma. We actually got toenail clippings to use for trace element work. And every 2 years, we have people fill out a standardized questionnaire. But every 4 years, we collect data on diet. And that repeated collection of dietary over time is completely unique for a large population that's been followed for decades. There is no other resource anywhere that has this kind of information. And if someone reports cancer, we go back to them, get permission to get medical records and to get their pathology samples as well. So we have a lot of information about these participants. I should also mention that as we were conducting the study, it became apparent that a lot of what is happening that causes breast cancer is operating during the childhood and adolescent years. And the clearest lead on that was the American atomic bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. If women were children or young adults, then a few decades later, there was an increase in breast cancer. But after age about 40, the breast tissue seemed almost immune to radiation, and there was not much of an increase in breast cancer. And a lot of other work has now suggested that diet earlier in life is important, or diet, if it's going to be acting, could be most important early in life. So we enrolled another 116,000 women who were the next generation younger in Nurses Health Study 2. And that began in 1989, following the same kind of process and data collection. And we're now enrolling in Nurses Health Study 3, which is, again, the next generation, third generation. And I didn't show it here, but we also have about 25,000 participants of Nurses Health Study 2 who we enrolled when they were 10 to 14 years of age back in about 1998. And a lot of that collection was sponsored by the Breast Cancer Research Foundation, to whom we're very grateful for support over the years. So back to 1980 and the data here. I will show a slide. This is our current version of the kind of questionnaire that we're using. We have about 130 foods. This is just one section of it, but the main kind of question is here for each food listed, fill in the circle indicating how often on average you use the amount specified during the past year. So we ask about skim or low-fat milk, for example, and how often you have a glass of milk. And then there's a multiple choice response field there from never or less than once per month up to 6 or more per day. And we go through a series again of about 130 questions about specific foods and beverages. We've done a lot of validation of this, and even though it's fairly simple, it works amazingly well. We may not know exactly how much milk they're taking, but we can certainly separate people who have only occasional consumption of milk from those who drink 2 or 3 glasses of milk per day. When you start asking, you realize for almost everything, there is quite a wide range of consumption that allows us to look at dose-response relationship, the amount consumed versus risk of breast cancer in this case. But we're looking at pretty much everything that can go wrong, all kinds of cancers, cardiovascular disease, now dementia, and Parkinson's disease at the end of life. But after 2 years, when we first looked at the follow-up, By that time, we had several hundred cases of breast cancer, and there were only 3 items on the whole questionnaire that were related to breast cancer, and they were beer, wine, and distilled alcoholic beverages. And the likelihood that 3 were alcoholic beverages was beyond what we would expect by chance. And we waited another 2 years to see if that was reproducible information, and it was. So we published that finding in 1987 in the New England Journal of Medicine. And here we could see, with increasing amount of alcohol, increasing risk of breast cancer, with about a 50% increase in the women drinking 1 or more glasses of alcohol per day compared to those who didn't drink alcohol. This was controversial when it came out. A lot of my colleagues just didn't believe it. They said, how could that quite modest amount of alcohol be having such a biological effect? But actually, it's not a modest amount of alcohol. It's a drink is about 10 to 15 grams per day, and compared to a lot of things people were studying carcinogens, this was a huge amount. And we can see biological effects. Blood lipids change, other things change in the blood with 1 drink per day. So it's not a trivial amount, even though, because it's pretty common, we think of it as not being very much. Like everything else should be done in science, other people looked at this, and very consistently, others found the same kind of relationship, higher risk of breast cancer with increasing amounts of alcohol. And we've learned quite a bit about it. This is now with 24 years of follow-up in the Nurses' Health Study. Here we have, I can't remember, but it's about 5,000 women by that time had developed breast cancer, and there with the larger numbers, the confidence intervals here, the 0 bars get tighter, and it's looking the data don't bounce around so much. It's quite linear. And even here, 5 to 9 grams of alcohol per day, that's about 1 drink every other day. There's about a 15% increase in risk of breast cancer compared to non-drinkers. And if we go up to 20 or more grams a day, that's like 1.5 drinks per day and higher. There, the relative risk gets up to about 40%, or 1.4, about 40% higher than non-consumers. And so even here at about 1 or 2 drinks a day, there's about 20–30% increase in risk of alcohol. Now, one might ask, is that important? It's not nearly as strong as smoking and lung cancer, but I think most people here think that mammograms are important, and mammograms give about a 25% reduction in mortality from breast cancer. They're not a 100% shield by any means. And so basically this amount of alcohol is about enough to counteract the benefit of having a mammogram, which people do think is pretty important. So I would think most women would consider a 25–30% increase in risk of breast cancer to be important. We've also learned more details that this is due to, it looks like it's pretty clearly due to alcohol per se, because it doesn't matter whether it's coming from wine or from beer or from distilled beverages. Also, we see that if women were drinking alcohol during early adult life and then stop, their risk goes down compared to women who kept on drinking that amount of alcohol throughout life. So it's not baked into risk. It is a reversible risk. Exactly how quickly that reverses, it's probably not the next year or 2, but after some years, it does go down.
Dr. Willett, there's one question just while you're on the topic of alcohol. Is there a difference in the type of alcohol, whether it's beer, wine, or hard alcohol? Does that have an impact on these numbers?
No, it does. It seems to have, if there's any difference, it's very small. It doesn't matter. Yeah.
And a lot of people ask whether that's because that's a liver effect and that's an estrogen effect, or is the biochemical pathway clear?
And not exactly. It's probably due to multiple factors. There is some modest effect on increasing, it looks like, bioavailable estrogen. And I was going to also mention that alcohol does have an anti-folic acid effect. That's been known for quite a while at heavier doses. but it does look like even at modest doses, there's some. And in our earlier work, we did see that that combination of alcohol plus low folic acid was related to a magnified effect of the alcohol. And so that would be a really bad combination, low folic acid plus higher alcohol, or even moderate alcohol. But since 1998, we've been fortifying our food in the United States with folic acid. It goes into most grain products, almost everything made with flour, except whole grain is not fortified, actually, and we should be consuming mostly whole grain, but most people are consuming mostly refined grain. And that has pretty much eliminated low folic acid levels in the United States since 1998. So
But wouldn't you say that if you are drinking, make sure that you take some folic acid?
well, I think it is a good idea to still do that, even though it probably is going to have less of a benefit than it did when so many people had quite very low folic acid levels. But I, in general, think the best way to get that folic acid is part of just a standard multivitamin, multimineral. They almost all have 100 micrograms of folic acid, which is plenty. And that multiple vitamin multimineral is actually it's cheap. It's at my Walgreens here. It's 8 cents a day, basically. And you also get a full range of minerals and vitamins that fill in possible gaps in diets. And many people do have gaps, including even if you have a perfect diet, you may be low in vitamin D. And the preparations now, most of them have 1,000 international units of vitamin D. And there was just a study recently by my colleague, former student, Joanne Manson, a really good epidemiologist, showing that the supplement, that standard multivitamin, multimineral reduces cognitive decline. And we have other data that it reduces, very likely to reduce colorectal cancer risk. So I think taking that, getting that folic acid as part of a multivitamin, multimineral package, not a mega vitamin or something like that are expensive, but this standard brand name multivitamin, multimineral it looks like there's a lot of benefit from that, and that will ensure that we don't get low on folic acid. So but it's pretty sure that the fortification did help, but it's still, there are enough other factors going on pushing breast cancer up that was noted by Dr. Green. Breast cancer rates in young women in particular are going up. We've looked at many other aspects of diet, and I just don't have time to go into all of them. But one of the important findings is that fruit and vegetable consumption is related to lower risk of estrogen receptor negative breast cancer. And it does seem like yellow-orange vegetables in particular have some benefit. Carrots, yams, sweet potatoes, winter squash in particular are related to lower risk of breast cancer. And if we look overall, that relationship is pretty weak. But if we look at specific types of breast cancer, we do see quite strong inverse relationships with ER-negative breast cancer. And this is particularly important, as many of you know, there's a less favorable prognosis with ER-negative breast cancer. And so being able to reduce risk of that has really been something that's been hard to do, but it's pretty clear now, and this is a highly reproducible finding, that higher intake of fruits and vegetables, but in particular, dark green and orange vegetables are beneficial for ER-negative, ER-PR-negative breast cancer and HER2-type breast cancer, about a 50% lower risk. And we've also seen this with blood levels of beta carotene. That's the orange pigment in these vegetables, is related to a higher intake of beta carotene is reflected in the blood, is likely to reduce breast cancer, ER-negative breast cancer, by about 50%. Now, whether it's beta carotene per se or something else in these vegetables, we can be less confident, but consuming those vegetables on a regular basis is definitely a good thing to do. And I didn't bring any slides on it, but we now have data emerging from our group of women who were in the Nurses' Health Study 2, and reported their diets during childhood, well, while they were in high school. And we do see stronger associations for intake and for dietary factors during that period of life. And that's consistent with the bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, that a lot of the origins of breast cancer are actually operating there. We don't have any breast cancers during that younger age group, but when we look at incidence of benign breast disease in that population, the association with alcohol is particularly strong. So that we don't know all of the explanation of this rise in breast cancer in young women. Some of it is related to people delaying their first child, getting education, going on, starting their careers and having a first child later. That is part of the picture, but it's quite likely, as has been mentioned, that a higher consumption of alcohol, particularly starting at a younger age, is important. So that is something that definitely is not adequately recognized and is something that we can potentially modify. Dr. Green also mentioned some other issues about what to do after breast cancer, and I didn't bring any slides on that, but we are looking at diet after breast cancer and among women for whom we had diet before breast cancer, so we can really isolate those because they are correlated. People who have a dietary pattern before their diagnosis tend to have a similar diet afterwards, but there are changes too. People do shift their diets once a major cancer is diagnosed. And the first thing to say is that thanks to earlier detection and better treatment, most women who have breast cancer don't die of breast cancer, and that's the good news. The very large majority that go on to die of other things like anybody else. And we do see very strong benefits of healthy diets for heart disease, lung disease, other kinds of conditions. And we look at the whole population, not just the breast cancer population at that. And so the first order is to have generally healthy diet. But of course, we're also very interested in preventing recurrence and reducing mortality after breast cancer. And it takes longer to look at that. We certainly need longer follow-up, but it's interesting. The one factor that is clearest actually is coffee consumption, and that being beneficial. So if Sharon, you're having your cup of coffee in the morning, enjoy that. Maybe have another cup. And
Thank goodness.
Yes, thank you.
We need some good news. And there's we could talk about an hour about that particular topic, but it probably is operating by reducing insulin resistance because there are dozens and dozens of studies now showing lower risks of type 2 diabetes with higher coffee consumption. And there's lots of things there. It's probably not the caffeine, and it's probable that it's the decaffeinated coffee will have a similar benefit, but we have fewer people consuming larger amounts of decaf, so we can't be quite so sure about that. Sugar-sweetened beverages are related to higher risks of fatal breast cancer for consumption after the diagnosis, and of course those aren't good for anything, and definitely good to keep low. But in fact, those have been the two strongest factors that we've seen related to prognosis after the diagnosis of breast cancer for breast cancer specific mortality. But of course, again, overall diet is it's healthy, good overall diet is a starting point because we have to be concerned about preventing everything and staying generally healthy. But the coffee finding is something that that does need some further expansion and to understand that better. More recently, and this is not yet published, I think probably all of us are concerned about the acceleration of climate change that is occurring, and the consequences of that are going to be devastating around the world for our children and grandchildren. So I've spent a lot of my time in the last few years working at actually co-chairing an international commission to look at a path forward to be able to feed people a healthy diet and do it in a way that is environmentally sustainable. So We published a major report in the journal Lancet in 2019 and identified what we've called a planetary health diet, which is pretty similar to a traditional Mediterranean diet in that it's primarily plant-based, but not necessarily strictly vegan or strictly vegetarian. There's a moderate, it looks like we can have a moderate amount of poultry, fish, some eggs, but primarily emphasizing plant bases of protein, such as nuts and legumes and soy products with, again, generally a Mediterranean type diet picture. And we do see that that's strongly related to lower total mortality. And more recently, one of our postdocs, Andrea Romanos Nonclaris, has done some analyses looking at adherence to a planetary health diet in relation to invasive breast cancer. And at this time, almost 10,000 women are in this analysis who develop breast cancer. And what we see is a modestly lower risk of overall breast cancer incidence, about a 10% lower risk in women in the highest 20% of this adherence to a planetary health diet compared to the lowest adherence. But when we look at ER negative, ER positive breast cancer, again, that almost all that benefit is coming from lower risk of ER negative breast cancer, about a 20% lower risk of ER negative breast cancer. So there is some good news here again that we can, by eating a diet that is both good for our planet and overall mortality, it does appear that there's some reduction in risk of ER negative breast cancer as well. So there's a double or triple win there.
You know,
And
one
Dr.
of the things that I think is interesting is that we learn about the microbiome and the importance of immune stimulation, and that really being very important for triple negative breast cancer. So it's probably that you're getting the right kind of microbiome and the types of organisms that stimulate the immune system, which can actually impact, your risk of ER negative breast cancer. So I think that's super interesting.
Yes, it is. I mean, there's so much to be learned there. We've just finished a collection of fecal samples for microbiome work. About 20,000 of the Nurses Health Study 2 gave us samples that we put in our freezers to look at as we follow this group over time. And you're absolutely right that's really, there's a lot going on there biologically, and it seems very likely that's part of the picture. So it's something, actually it's something I tried to do back in 1980, but there we weren't able to analyze the microbiome by genetic analysis. And you can do this genetic analysis in just a little bit, and it doesn't have to, it can be frozen and preserved. It's very stable. Back in 1980, you actually had to get the fresh samples and do the cultures on that right away. And my dietitian team told me they were going to quit if they had to collect any more samples. So it didn't go any farther in 1980. There's been the technology has actually allowed us to do this kind of work, which is very exciting. So hopefully we'll be wiser in a few more years to understand that more deeply. But a couple takeaways. Breast cancer continues to be a huge burden, even though mortality overall has decreased from breast cancer. Moderate alcohol consumption increases risk of breast cancer, and reducing intake decreases risk of breast cancer. Consumption of fruits and vegetables, especially dark orange vegetables, is associated with lower risk of breast cancer, especially ER-negative tumors. And consuming a diet that is healthier for our planet is also associated with lower risk of breast cancer. That's a quick spin over a few of the things we've been doing, and hopefully we have time for a little more thought and discussion.
Walter, is the impact of alcohol something like we see with hormone replacement, that once you stop, you start lowering your risk? So if you drank a lot when you were in your formative years, is that a permanent risk, or does that go down when you stop, or is that just not known?
It does go down when we stop. Yes, that's a very important point. So it's not it's not locked in. The risk is not locked in. It does go down. We for as you know, for hormones like Prempro, if you stop them, the risk goes down like almost in the next year or two, really quickly. For alcohol, most people just don't stop suddenly like that. So it's a little harder to get the timing there. We can't say the risk is gone in 5 years. There may be some there, but by 10 years, there's a clear decline in risk. So it's definitely, though, not something that's permanent.
Do you have any resources that you could point us to we can share with the group for a diet that is healthy for the planet? Like any resources listing out certain things or information we could distribute? I'm sure that would be of interest to the group too.
Sure. Actually, if you look on our departmental website, if you just go to Google, like we go for everything else, just type in nutrition source Harvard, and you'll come to our departmental website, and there's a section on planetary health there.
Right.
But very briefly, it's pretty simple, actually, and partly because we have a really good example of a Mediterranean diet, but you can do it from foods from many different cultures around the world. But it basically is primarily emphasizing whole grains, fruits, vegetables, with only modest amounts of animal source foods. It boils down very simply to 1 + 1, about 1 serving of dairy a day and about 1 serving of other animal source proteins. And that could be like a serving of fish, a serving of poultry, but red meat not more than about once a week. So it's actually I find that very simple to do.
Someone asked a question here about the intermittent fasting and whether that is important. Seems to me like it's more important to eat the right kinds of foods, but what's known about that? I think there was a big study that kind of showed it didn't work so well, I think.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and appropriate because the issue of our obesity epidemic is huge. We did an analysis, we reported a couple of years ago that overweight and obesity now are accounting for more premature deaths than smoking, which was 20 years ago, it was not that way. And we're up at about 70% of our population overweight or obese. And again, it wasn't that way. That wasn't that way when I started working in this area at all. In the early 70s, the prevalence of obesity was about 10%. Now it's 42%. So this is having huge impacts on health. And what to do about it? It's pretty clear that a healthier diet quality will help us control weight. Just as you said, the type of food we're eating, primarily whole foods, less refined foods, is the principal direction to go in. So in other words, whole grain instead of refined grain. More fruits, vegetables, and prepared as whole as possible. But this question about intermittent fasting has captured the attention of a lot of people. The formal studies don't show, it's hard to show much benefit compared to just trying to limit total caloric intake, but neither of those are terribly successful on their own. And most of the studies have not been long enough. We really need to go on for a couple of years, not just a few months in our research on these, because people can lose some weight on almost any diet, but the real challenge is maintaining weight control. First of all, not gaining more weight to begin with, and if people lose some weight, trying to keep it off. So far, the best dietary pattern is actually the Mediterranean type diet that's been shown in multiple studies to be the most effective among the dietary patterns over the long run that have been evaluated formally. And I think that's because it's something people can live with. You have to be able to be satisfied and enjoy it for any kind of diet to be sustainable. But there are some people who for whom intermittent fasting is working. And diet it's not like preventing breast cancer when you sort of get one shot at preventing a cancer or a heart attack. With diet, you can try something, and if it works for you, that's good. And it's of all the formal studies, what's really remarkable is how much variability there is in weight in the formal randomized trials that have been conducted. Some people lose very substantial weights and keep it off, but other people don't lose weight. If they do, they regain it after a year. So I think it is an area where we can, in some ways, do our own experiment for ourselves. But underlying that, still, it has to be an important quality of diet that if we're interested in our long-term health and well-being.
So what's your opinion of some of the new weight loss medications? And I think we saw that, some of the fiber diets actually mimic some of the weight loss drugs too. So maybe you could start on one and then switch over to like more of a high fiber diet. Is it just better to try and get people to lose weight however we can?
Yeah, that's a really major topic of discussion. And in some ways, the one thing that's undeniable, this is the holy grail of the pharmaceutical industry, where you have a drug that sells for $10,000 to $20,000 a year. 70% of the population is eligible to take it and needed to take it for life to be effective. And so you could work out the economics of that. We're spending about, if we really let this play out and everybody who is eligible took it, it would raise our healthcare costs from about 18% of gross national product to about 28% of gross national product. And we're already spending twice as much as anybody else, any other country is on healthcare. So it would be an economic disaster if we really, if everyone who is eligible used it. And unfortunately, it does seem that if people take it and stop, they don't change anything else, they not to anyone's surprise, weight all comes back. And so the big question is, what happens? What do people do when they take it? Do they use it as an opportunity to really change their lifestyle and improve diet quality, eat more fiber, and be more regular in physical activity? Or do people say, oh, I can eat what I want to now and go in the other direction? And unfortunately, the latter seems to be more what's happening. But again, if someone is really careful about taking advantage of this, and these medications are impressive in the amount of weight that many people lose. Again, there's a lot of variability, but some people have very sustained, very substantial weight loss. So we certainly need all the tools and how we can deal with this issue. But still, in the long run and for the total population, it's important to have a healthy diet. And one really important principle is that healthy weight is really important. But if we just take a drug, lose weight, we're still not going to be healthy unless we have a good diet and have regular physical activity. It's definitely not a cure-all for the generally not good direction we're headed in terms of health in America and the world as a whole.
Yeah,
All
well,
right.
super exciting, and thank you so much, just full of important information. And we hope everyone's enjoyed it. I know I always learn something new every time I hear you speak, Walter. You're just a font of information, and thank you for dedicating your career to all of this work and making it so accessible to all of us. And
Well, thank you for your great work in getting the word out. We certainly, if we could put into practice half of what we learn, we would be a lot healthier. I think that's a huge challenge. So thank you for your efforts and the great work.
And Sharon, I think your story setting us off, about why we should all really pay attention is so important. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to participate.
And just a note too, I know we have several wisdom participants on the call. I think what I'm
Yes.
excited about is that we have such an opportunity with our wisdom cohort to continue to learn and contribute to this body of knowledge. The nurses' health study was huge and is, it's contributed so greatly. And I think we have an opportunity to collaborate and perhaps ask some additional questions within our wisdom study that can help to contribute to this field as well. So thank you to those who have joined tonight. Thank you for those wisdom participants who are on. If you have any questions, please do let us know. We're happy to answer them. There is a link in the chat for a evaluation survey. We'd love to hear your feedback and also ideas for the next forums. But again, thank you so much, Dr. Green and Dr. Willett, and for everyone who's joining. And we hope you have very happy holiday season and happy new year. And our next community forum is the last Monday of January, which is the 29th at 4 o'clock Pacific time. So please join us again in January and make some suggestions in terms of topics you'd like to hear in the new year.
Great. Thanks so much,
Right.
everybody.
Thanks.